Hello and welcome back to Lucknow Nama Academy. My name is Jamie and today we will be discussing methods in psychology. When we talk about methods in psychology, there are three main methods: experimental, questionnaire and observation method. So now we will start with experimental method. Experimental method is a research method in which researchers systematically alter one or more variables in order to determine whether such changes influence some aspect of behavior or not. Now let's try and understand experimental method with the help of an example. So let's say there is a researcher named Dr. Brown. Dr. Brown thinks that teaching with method A can significantly improve learning. Now to see if he is right or wrong, Dr. Brown will have to test this. To do this, he takes a group of students and divides them randomly into two groups, Group X and Group Y. After dividing the groups, the Group X is taught using method A, whereas the Group Y is taught using the same method as before. After some time, both the groups are given the same test. Scores of Group X and Group Y are compared. If Group X scored more than Group Y, then method A proves to have an impact on learning. But if both the groups scored equally, then method A proves not to have any significant impact on learning. So basically, the experimental method in psychology involves two key steps. The presence or strength of some variable believed to affect behavior is systematically altered. The effects of such alterations, if any, are carefully measured. The factor systematically varied by researcher is called independent variable or IV, while the aspect of behavior studied is called dependent variable or DV. Now let's us understand what is a variable. A variable is an event or condition which can have different values. Variables can be dependent or independent. Now let's understand with the help of an example. Size of a plant is a variable. Now the size of plant can hold the value 12 cm or 15 cm or 20 cm, etc. Amount of water is another variable which can hold the value of 20 milliliters, 30 milliliters, etc. Now hypothetically, let's say if the variable amount of water is increased in value, variable size of plant also increases. That means amount of water is an independent variable which affects the dependent variable, that is, the size of the plant. The factor systematically varied by researcher here is called the independent variable or IV, that is the water amount, while the aspect of behavior studied is called dependent variable or that is the size of plant. In graphing the results of an experiment, it is conventional in psychology to plot the values of the independent variable on the horizontal axis or the abscissa, the values of the dependent variable on the vertical axis or ordinate. In this way, we can see at a glance how the dependent variable of a behavior is related to the values of the independent variable. Now that we have understood about the variables, think about Dr. Brown's research. What do you think was the independent variable and what was the dependent variable? Following are the options A, B, C, D for both independent and dependent variable. You can write your answer in the comments below. I'll tell the correct answer at the end of this video. Moving ahead, now we'll talk about control. In an experiment, it is important that the only specified independent variables are allowed to change. Factors other than the independent variable which might affect the dependent variable must be held constant. Two main strategies are used to control extraneous factors. One is control group and the other is the measures of behavior are made before the independent variable is introduced in order to establish a behavioral baseline against which to compare behavior after the independent variable is presented. Now that we have read about the two main strategies used to control extraneous factors, let's study them in detail. For that, we'll need some explanation. So now, I'll start with the control group strategy. The first strategy. Now in here, we take the whole group of our subjects and we divide them into two groups, the control group and the experimental group. Now, in the experimental group, we introduce independent variable or IV, whereas in control group, we do not introduce any independent variable. Let's say the control group gives the result R1, whereas the experimental group gives the result R2. We compare these results R1 and R2. If these results are equal, that means that independent variable had no effect on the experimental group. But if these results are not equal, that simply means that independent variable did have an effect on the experimental group. Now let's us understand how that actually helps us reduce any other extraneous factors' effect on the dependent variable. When we take a group and divide that in control group and experimental group, we actually see that the whole group is divided randomly without any basis in the control group and experimental group. That is, if there is a person A in the group T, then the person A has an equal probability, 1/2 probability of getting into control group and the same probability, that is 1/2 probability of getting into experimental group. So that's how we divide the people in the control and the experimental group. So now, if the T group consists of all the people A, B, C, D, etc., who are equal in other factors such as age, gender, etc. So now that we have divided them randomly, it does not actually have much of a difference in control group and experimental group, and hence we can actually say that whatever result are given by the experimental group after the introduction of independent variable is actually because of the independent variable and not because of any other factor. That is exactly what the books also say. Ideally, when a control group design is used, the groups should be equivalent in every way except for the independent variable. In practice, it is very difficult to match subjects in control and experimental groups on all the factors that might conceivably affect their performance. As a compromise, subjects are often assigned at random to experimental and control groups. It is hoped that this will approximately equalize any extraneous factors in the control and experimental groups which might affect the experimental outcome. Now let's talk about the second strategy, and that is ABA, or within subject design. In this, subjects serve as their own controls. In this method, a baseline normal level of behavior is established before the independent variable is introduced. The behavior after the addition of the independent variable can be compared with the baseline behavior. This before and after method gives good control over individual differences among the subjects, which might affect the outcome of the experiment because such individuals' differences are present both before and after the independent variable is introduced. Now let us understand the second strategy, and that is within group or ABA. Now what does it mean within group? Within group means that the same group, let's say T, is tested before and after the introduction of the independent variable. Now how? Let's say the group T is tested for learning certain thing and the strategy used A is more effective or less effective. We gave T a test and we measured the results, that is R1, which is the baseline. After the test was given and the results were declared and noted, we introduced the independent variable, that is the teaching method A. Now this independent variable was introduced, and after that the same test was given again. And now the results came out to be R2. Now what we have to see is if R1 is equal to R2. If it is equal, that simply means that IV have had no effect on the group T. But if it is not equal, that simply means that the IV, that is the teaching method A, had an effect on the group T, which changed the results from R1 to R2, and that's why they are not equal. Now that you have understood, let's see what does ABA means. A is the baseline, that is the results or the behavior of the group before the independent variable was introduced. B is after the independent variable was introduced, the results or the behavior. Now if this independent variable is removed, then the behavior or the results should return to A. That means independent variable changed the behavior or the result from A to B. When it is removed, then it automatically changes back from B to A. That was it means with A, B, A method. Now you can see it here as well in the diagram. There is A, that is a baseline or the measure before of the behavior, whereas B is the measure after the independent variable is introduced. When the independent variable is removed, the behavior returns to A, and that is what it means with A-B-A method. Now that we have understood the control strategies, can you identify which control strategy was used by Dr. Brown? A. Control group or B. Behavior baseline? You can write your answer in the comments below. I'll tell the correct answer at the end of this video and I'll get back to you. We also need to understand that it is important that experiments can be repeated or in other words, replicated. The advantages and importance of replication are obvious. If we get the same results over and over again under the same conditions, we can be sure of their accuracy beyond all reasonable doubt. Experimental findings which cannot be repeated generally do not become a part of the fabric of a science. A dramatic discovery may be reported, but it cannot be replicated, then the other scientists will not accept it. The replication or check-up ability, as it has been called, is an essential part of the experimental method. Now let us talk about the observation method. One alternative to the experimental method is the systematic observation. This approach is similar to experimental method in that variables are measured, but it is different in that researchers do not manipulate the independent variable. Instead, they capitalize on the variations that occur naturally. Using this method, psychologist researchers simply make the most exacting and systematic study they can of naturally occurring behavior. After making a number of observations, the psychologists can, using certain rules of logic, try to infer the causes of the behavior being studied. Psychology shares this approach with a number of other sciences. Coming to the last method, the questionnaire method. A questionnaire is a research tool made up of a list of questions intended to collect data from respondents. One way to think of questionnaires is as a type of written interview. They can be conducted in person, over the phone, online, or by mail. Using questionnaires is a reasonably quick, easy, and effective technique to get a lot of data from a big sample of individuals. Since the researcher won't have to be there while the surveys were filled out, data may be gathered rather rapidly. When doing interviews would be infeasible, this is help for big populations. However, a problem with questionnaires is that respondents may lie due to social desirability. Most individuals prefer to project a positive pictures of themselves. Thus, they may lie or distort the truth to seem good. What is basically the difference between the experimental method and the observation method? In experimental method, the researcher manipulates the variables, whereas in observational method, the researcher does not manipulate. The manipulation here is the key to understand. That is, if the researcher does manipulate or does not manipulate. If he does manipulate, it's experimental. If he does not manipulate and simply observes, then it is an observation method. So these were the three methods in psychology. I hope it proves insightful. As we discussed earlier, I'll be telling the answers of the two questions I asked. The first one was about the variables in Dr. Brown's research. Now the answer for the independent variable is option D, and that is the teaching method A. The answer for dependent variable is the performance of the students on the test, and that is option C. Another question I asked was about the method of control in Dr. Brown's research, and the method of control is option A, that is control group. As we discussed, that he divided his subjects in two groups, X and Y, and hence it was a control group method. I hope the answers are clear, and I hope that this was true. And now we have reached the end of our video. If you have any queries, you can leave them in the comment section below and I will revert back to you. Don't forget to like and share the video and subscribe to our channel. Check out the previous videos as well and click the bell icon to stay tuned. All the best. Thank you. This is Jamie.